Welcome to episode 329 of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. I'm a retired agent on a mission to show you who the FBI is and what the FBI does through my books, my blog, and my podcast case reviews with former colleagues. Today, we get to speak to retired agent Frank Burton, who served in the FBI for over 22 years. In this episode, he reviews a hate crime investigation where an Arab American woman received a threatening note which mentioned "Remember 9/11" and her kids being tied to a fence. The victim feared that she and her 2 young children would be harmed. Frank conducted more than 40 interviews to identify and arrest the surprising creator of the anonymous note. During this episode, Frank also talks about working on a Special Operations Group, SOG, surveillance squad. Frank Burton was assigned to the Philadelphia Division, where he worked civil rights matters and was an SOG team leader, conducting surveillances for all squads and violations in the field office. Frank and his team were frequently deployed on temporary duty to major events all over the country. During his bureau career, he was also a hostage negotiator, media coordinator, civil rights coordinator, coordinator of the Employee Assistance Program, EAP, and a member of the Bureau's National Recruitment Team. Frank has been an ordained minister for 27 years. He and his wife are the founders and pastors of Perfect Will Ministries in Newcastle, Delaware. Frank is the author of From FBI Agent to an Apostle, Saga of a Spiritual Sniper, where he details his life experiences and how one encounter during his FBI career changed his entire life. Frank also operates Burton Executive Security Training, providing executive protection services and comprehensive training for security professionals. The company specializes in active shooting training for churches, schools, and businesses. Now, before we get to the episode, I want to remind everyone there should be no political ads. If you hear any while listening to the show, please let me know. When it comes to stories about the FBI, this is your safe place. I also want to let you know I will continue to post more than 2 episodes a month. Now, when that extra episode pops up depends on what my schedule looks like that month. So what I'm saying is, to make sure you don't miss an episode, please follow FBI Retired Case File Review wherever you listen to podcasts. In your podcast app's description of this episode, you'll find links to where you can join my reader team, where I talk about crime fiction and the FBI in books, TV, and movies. You can also buy me a cup of coffee and discover my nonfiction book, FBI Myths and Misconceptions, and my 2 FBI crime novels, Pay to Play and Greedy Givers, all available as ebooks and paperbacks wherever books are sold, and audiobooks on Audible and Spotify. Thank you for your support. Now here's the show. I want to welcome my guest, retired agent Frank Burton Jr. Hey, Frank, how are you?
Hey, Jerry, thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, this is great because we've known each other for a very long time. We consider each other to be good friends. We keep in touch and we know what's going on in each other's lives. So this is an opportunity for us to go back to our professional lives and talk more about cases and the things that you did in the FBI. And we selected one of the cases from your book, From FBI Agent to an Apostle, Saga of a Spiritual Sniper.
Absolutely. Seems like old times, so I'm ready to go ahead and dig into it, Jerry.
All right, very good. So the case that we're going to talk about is a civil rights investigation. So why don't we get right into it? Where would you like to start?
Okay, so in 2006, as a civil rights coordinator, I received a phone call from FBI headquarters who told me that they had a possible hate crime case and they wanted me to go investigate. down at the Sheraton Hotel, Airport Sheraton Hotel. And so I went down there and I spoke to a lady by the name of Nina Tamani, who said that she was a victim of a possible hate crime. And she told me that she had reported it to the Philadelphia Police Department over on 55th and Cedar. And she had went there and they kind of like brushed it off. So I did receive a call from headquarters and they said, you need to go down there and you need to talk to her just to figure out what was going on. So that's how the investigation began.
Well, this is a little different because most of the investigations that we open in Philadelphia, come from a Philadelphia source, whether it's just directly from the victim or an attorney or the U.S. Attorney's Office. But you said it was FBI headquarters that made you aware of this allegation of a hate crime.
Yeah, you got to remember too, Jared, this is 2006. So this is 5 years off of 9/11, and this is an Arab American female. And so the Bureau is taking everything serious. Anything that even smells like a hate crime, they're sending it out. So she called up and complained that she went to the Philadelphia Police Department. They kind of brushed it off. And they said, well, we'll send somebody from our division down. And since I was the coordinator, I went down and I sat down and I did an investigation on that on October 2nd, 2006.
All right. So what did she tell you when you first met with her?
So she gave me the background of what had happened about going to Philly PD. And she was she was very direct. You remember her. She was a very direct woman. And she said that this is a hate crime and she wanted it investigated. And she went on to show me. It was kind of unique, Jared. So when I went there, so you figure inside of the Sheraton, she receives this letter in her office mailbox. So it's not mailed into her. So somebody from the inside has to have access. So they put it in her inner office mailbox. And the letter was contained in a large white, probably like a 9.5 by 12 envelope. And it had her name, Tamani, scribbled like, it almost looked as if somebody took their offhand and wrote, like a little kid writing, right? And that was on the outside. So when you open up the envelope, I open up the envelope and I look. Inside of that large envelope was another 4x6 letter envelope. And on the outside of that was a small, looked like a periodical cutout. And it read that I'm quite certain that when we look back, there are things that we wish that we had been able to do differently or could have done better. So that's the periodical. So I open it up, and there's a white 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. And in a clover shape, they're neatly cut out. And I didn't know what they were at first, but they're neatly cut out periodicals in the shape of a clover. And it had all these different readings on it. And it said, some of the things that it said was remember 9/11. Other words that were contained on the note was that you and your kids tie onto the fence, strategically planned death. How influential is she? Let us count the ways. And patriotism and anger, along with desires of war or revenge. And Jared, so when I looked at the note, I was, I travel, FBI agents, we travel all the time. We take vacations with our family. And I said to myself, this looks like when you travel, you go to that stand of the periodicals and the little magazines and the little pamphlets that says, while you're here, you can go to this place. So I asked her, I said, where are the hotel? You guys got pamphlets? And she said, yeah. I said, well, where are they? I didn't see any when I came in the front. And she said, they're all the way in the back. And they were back near the swimming pool. And as I started to examine those little periodicals and some pamphlets about, while you're here, you can go here, you can do this. I started to see some of the lettering inside of it. And boom, I said, that's a clue. Whoever did it used these periodicals, carefully crafted them into a note.
Yeah, everybody should remember those brochures that different activities and places where you're vacationing are trying to get you to visit. You were able to recognize there was enough of those letters that you were able to easily recognize that this was probably where the note was cut from.
Yeah, I started to look at the note, and then looking at the pamphlets, I started to see the exact wordings, the words that were cut out. And they were in different pamphlets, but in different places. They weren't like right in the front. You had to really look to find them. And there are probably about 4 or 5 different pamphlets that I discovered that the person created the note from.
All right. So you already have some clues right away that somebody who has access to the Sheridan
Yes,
was involved in this.
absolutely.
All right. So where do you go from there?
So what I do, Jerry, is I look at where this boss is. She's in charge of sales. So her office is right behind the front desk. Off to the left, there's a kitchen staff. The dining area is off to the left. And then off behind there is just the maintenance staff. So I say, okay. I grab around and just started interviewing people. I grab around 40 people from all different parts, from her sales department, from the front desk, from maintenance, from the kitchen staff. And I just start interviewing them. I just start questioning them about their whereabouts.
Are you doing this one at a time in an isolated
Yeah,
area?
one at a time, one at a time, 40 different interviews, one at a time. And one of the things is as you know, as an FBI agent, and you understand this, and most of our viewers who are or were agents, they understand this. There are different techniques that you use. And one of the things, I was a hostage negotiator for years. And part of hostage negotiating and working with profilers, you look for specific things. And so during the course of all these interviews, I'm interviewing males, females, old people, younger people, all different races. I'm looking for clues. And one of the things, Jared, that I use to my advantage, we always use what we have. One writer said, bloom where you plant it. We always use what we have access to help us solve these different crimes. There's a book written by a guy called Chase Hughes, and it's called The 6-Minute X-Ray. And so in Chase Hughes' book, he shows you the skills and techniques, how to see behind the mask that people wear. So the whole time I'm interviewing these people, I'm digging in and I'm looking and I'm searching. And out of the 40, there are two that really stand out. And there are two that stand out because I understand that there's some deception and detection techniques that they're using. So they kind of stand out. And so I go through and I interview the 40. And after the 40, each of them, though, Jared, each of them at the end, I would end my interview by saying this. Well, let me tell you, if you lie to a federal agent or 1001 statute, I can lock you up for that. And just to see what they would, see if they would have any reaction. So I ended with that. And out of the 40, there were two that really stood out. So about a couple days later, I went back and I interviewed 12 more.
What do you mean these two stood out? What was their reaction that made you note that it was different?
So with the culprit, one of the things that stood out about the culprit is Miss Kia Reed. One of the things that stood out about her is that as soon as I started the interview, there's a deception and detection technique called flattery deluge. And Jared, what she did was from the time I sat down, I started asking her questions about, how long she'd been there, what was her position. And she worked with Miss Tamani immediately. It was all this flattery. Oh, you look good. And I don't believe that you're an FBI agent. And how could you be an agent? And are you married? Oh, I'm looking at you. Oh, you are married. Like she's not even focusing on what I'm asking her. And so I'm going like, this is odd. And so early in that interview, when you use flattery deluge, it's an exacerbated use of flattery or compliments to deflect the flow of the interview, right? We call it a blocking technique and a blocking behavior. And it's usually used by a subject when they're guilty and they want to throw the investigator off. So that stood out about her. The other one, the source that eventually ended up assisting us, they used a technique called psychological distancing. These are just terms, again, as a negotiator or a profiler that we use. Everybody knows what they are, but these are just technical terms that we put to them. So when a person uses psychological distancing, it's when somebody speaks about something that they feel guilty about. And what they'll do is instead of, I'm an English major, so semantics. So what they will do is they'll soften up the severity of the crime by distancing themselves with the words that they use and the object of the questioning. For example, I'll give you an example. So what they do is they use elongated words because when you make a word longer in semantics or English, you kind of soften it up, right? An example is if the crime is, you molested somebody. Molest, that sounds really hard. That's short, sweet, to the point. but a person would soften it up by talking about, I was interfering with touching, right? They soften the phrase up. If I say sin, as a preacher, because I'm a pastor too, then people don't want to hear that. They kind of turn you off. But if I say indiscretion, then they kind of do that. So she used psychological distancing. And here's one that everybody knows. The old president said, I did not have sexual relations with that woman, right? Bill Clinton said, I did not have sexual relations with that woman. He didn't say Monica Lewinsky, so he distanced himself in what he said, even though he was guilty. Those were the two things that really stood out with him. And so what was happening was this person was using these kind of terms, and they were edgy, just by their body motion, using this 6-minute x-ray. You could tell they were very uncomfortable with what was being asked about them about this crime. And at the end, with both of them, I came back again the second time and said, that I can arrest you for lying to a federal agent with the 1001 violation. And shortly thereafter, probably the next day, the second person that I interviewed, the one that helped us out, had her lawyer call us, and they cooperated with me.
Let's go back and talk a little bit more about Nina. So, Nina, just tell me where she works and her position there.
She was the director of sales at the Airport Sheraton Hotel. And she worked with a group of maybe 10 to 12, all females who assisted her. Like I said, she was pretty direct. She was pretty harsh, and not everybody liked her style.
So you have this one person that's coming forward who wants to provide information. What did she tell you?
The person who cooperated with us told me, she said, listen, and the 1001 really got her. That was the second time she heard that. So she was like, okay. So what she told me was that exactly who the culprit was. And they told me that the reason why it happened was because Miss Tamani, her style of management was kind of harsh. It wasn't just management. This is how she kind of talked to a lot of people. She talked to me like that. I need you to come right now. And I was like, well, I can't. I'm on vacation with my family. I need you to. I can't do that. And so what happened was this person told me that Ms. Reed had given them 3 options when she talked to the person that assisted us. And the 3 options were Reed was either going to beat her up, she was going to damage her vehicle, or she could leave a note. And she chose the latter, to leave a note. Just to back off because her style was really abrasive.
I'm sure we'll hear more about this as you continue the case review, but it sounds like it was an immature or juvenile way of getting back at your boss that kind of blew up in her face.
Yeah, it was very immature and it was juvenile. You're talking about 2 different cultures. Miss Reed is a Black female from North Philadelphia, very strong-willed. And then you have Miss Tamani, who is from Egyptian descent. And you have 2 clashes of styles and just personalities. But unfortunately for Kia Reed, this is a time, like I said, 5 years off of 9/11, and we're at the height of hate crimes. So anything that anybody does, you're talking about in hate crimes, headquarters had us going out investigating people if they hung nooses for Halloween. The tension was so high during this period.
Yeah, and that had a lot to do about the FBI being criticized for missing opportunities to stop 9/11 and kind of a knee jerk reaction to make sure that that nothing being dismissed before it is thoroughly evaluated and checked out. So let's talk a little bit more about Nina Tamani. When she called about this, when she was insisting that something be done about this, tell me her fear factor. When you looked at the note, did you take it seriously? And do you believe that she was in fear of her life and the lives of her kids when she got that note?
When I went down there and I looked at the note, I took it seriously and I understood her fear because of her background. And when it said, remember 9/11, that's the biggest thing that stood out. That's the first thing. And that's where the press took off and everybody took off. But I understood her fear. I understood also the fact of now just being a minority and going to the police, and again, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to downplay Philadelphia Police Department. I have some great relationships with Philadelphia Police Department, had them then, but just going there and people kind of like just laughing it off. And they are like, I don't know exactly what they said, but seemingly to her, it was like, get out of here. Somebody just put this here. And so that's when she called our headquarters. And like you said, because it was of significance and, with the history of people believing that we didn't do enough, they told me to go down and investigate. So yeah, she had a valid claim. And I believe that she was very fearful, but she was fearful to come to the FBI as well, because in her country, in Egypt, and she says this throughout the case, that in her country, when you go to the FBI, you go in and you don't come out.
Or when you go into their version.
Yes. Yeah. Into their version, or when you go in, you don't come out. She had this image that we were the big bad wolf, that you come into us for help and you just kind of disappear, or we throw you into a black site somewhere. So she was very fearful of that as well.
So that really accents her fear level, that in spite of her reluctance to approach law enforcement, she did it anyway because she was so fearful of what would happen if she did not get help from the authorities.
Absolutely. And it was so real that her father, who is a political figure he's passed now, but who was a political figure out in California, and her husband told her, don't go to the FBI. Just leave it alone. Don't even pursue it, because of that same fear.
So once you get this information from the employee who was aware of what was really going on, what's your next step?
What happens is, once I get this information, that's when I go back and I interview Reed one more time. And so I sit down with her, because now we're closing in on some information. And so what happens, Jared, is I use, again, from that 6-minute x-ray, I'm listening, and she's starting to do the same thing that she was doing before. She's starting to try to use a lot of flattery and starting to try to say a lot of different things. And then I use a technique, and this technique is called a cathartic exhale. So what I do is I just let her go on, just let her rant for a little bit. And then all of a sudden, one of the techniques called a cathartic exhale, Jared, I just stop and don't say a word. So she stops, because now I'm not saying anything. And so I just look over at her and I breathe in real briefly, and then I breathe a long, loud exhale, and I just, and what that cathartic exhale does is it causes the subject to mimic the response, right? So when she mimics the response, I just look at her again and I say one more time, I talk about that 1001. And when I say that again, I say, well, this is the third time me coming here talking to you. I'm going to tell you one more time. If you lie to a federal agent, I can lock you up for that. And so what happens is they call what's called a confirmation glance. Reed looks at me after the exhale, and I say that. She looks at me, Jer. Then she simply closes her eyes. She tucks her chin in, and she puts her head down. And then I knew I had her. Right there. I knew I had her, and she admitted to it.
So what was her story?
Her story was exactly what was said. She didn't like the way that Miss Tamani was talking to her. She had 3 options. And in between, what I didn't tell you, in between, as the source is cooperating with us, we use what we call sophisticated investigative techniques. And what that means is our source goes in and our source wears a wire, and she gets Ms. Reed to talk about exactly what she did. And then that's how we really nail her.
So even if she had not confessed, you had her on tape admitting to what she had done.
Yes, ma'am.
So I recall, as you know, I recall this case very well. I was actually the media rep or spokesperson or public affairs agent at the time. And so I was very aware of this case. And I always thought it was sad, that she had committed this crime before 9/11 it may have been handled that she got fired.
Yes.
But you are so right in saying that the atmosphere of this particular time period did not allow for any type of
No tolerance.
tolerance. Yeah. Yes.
Mhm.
Thank you. Yeah. Absolutely no tolerance. She is basically now being charged with a federal crime for what we both have called an immature, childish act of revenge against her boss.
Absolutely. And Jared, what's crazy is, and I didn't know it at the time, and I wasn't thinking about it in this sense. I was just going out and doing my job. That case was solved in 5 months. On March 7th, 2007, I went down to the hotel and I put handcuffs and I arrested Miss Reed and I charged her with the violation Title 18 USC 1001, which are the false statements that I talked about. And then you're talking about immaturity. You're talking about clash of two different personalities. It wasn't as if, okay, you're arrested and go to jail, whatever. Still trying to give her leeway and the opportunity, like you do in any kind of crime, any kind of law enforcement. You try to leave way for a person for remorse. So on June 22nd, 2007, Ms. Reed pled guilty to committing a federal hate crime, like you just said, leaving a note threatening violence against Nina Tamani at her workplace and attempt to interfere with her federally protected employment activity. So you're talking about that's June. And then she gets arraigned on U.S. Title 18, Section 245B. Section 2C is exactly what I just talked about. But here's the point. On July 25th of 2007, this is months after she's arrested, I re-interviewed her in an off-the-record proffer with her attorney to see if she wanted to say anything else, to see if she had any remorse. She didn't provide any additional information, and she just stood by what she did. I did what I did, and that's it. Well, not remorseful at all, which led to the sentencing.
And what was the sentencing?
So we come up to October 24th in 2007, and Reed was sentenced to 8 months confinement in a community correction center. She had 2 years probation. She had 200 hours of community service to be done within the next 2 years. She was charged with a $1,000 fine and a $25 special assessment fee. But in addition, she had to go to anger management program. She had to complete a diversity and sensitivity training, a mental health program for evaluation and other treatment. Additional to that, she had to complete 150 hours of service in connection with a local mosque, enroll in a tolerance and reconciliation program. And Judge Prater, who was a judge at that time, she gave her strict, because they were friends. I mean, Ms. Reed took care of Miss Tamani's children at some point. And so Judge Prater gave her a strict stay away order.
This was, and I recall feeling this, such a sad situation that and people may not understand as I say this, but here is one woman of color who has chosen her way of retaliating against what she thinks is a bad supervisor by using a method of hate.
Yeah,
And that to me was so sad to see that she resorted to something like that.
absolutely. And like you say, Jared, is that you don't think about the young kids say you getting in your feelings. You don't think about what the outcome is. But again, we're talking about a time where everything is heightened. This is what the district judge said. Judge Jean Prater said this in a newspaper article. She said that the note, when she read the note, the reference to the children in the note, and Prater said this, it almost takes a person's breath away. Prater said it was a very serious crime and it almost had an incendiary quality to it, which it did. If you stop and you really think about it, you could have said anything else, but you start talking about 9/11, you know their background. And one of the funny things that I really appreciated, because just like we're talking here, and a lot of people have asked since then, they say, well, this is an immature young lady making a decision because she doesn't like a person's personality. Why are you guys making a federal case out of it? And Judge Prater addressed that. Judge Prater said this. She said, some might ask why I make a federal case out of this. She said, because our society can't afford to dismiss this kind of activity, right, or conduct. And then there was a news release by the Department of Justice, which made this case kind of unique out of Washington, D.C., that it was the 34th conviction for a federally based crime against the Muslim, an Arab, a Sikh, or South Asian since 9/11 attacks. And where it really stood out, it was the first of its kind in the Eastern District of Pennsylvania.
Frank, thank you for sharing this case with us. I know as far as the Bureau was concerned, this was a success, a major success for them. And I'm going to put a link in the show notes to some of the press that they put out about this, including them capturing Nina Tamani on video talking about what she felt and how much she appreciated the work that you did.
Yeah, Jerry, it was a very rewarding case. Probably the most rewarding things that came out of the case is one day, probably shortly after the case was over, probably October or early November. I'm sitting at my desk and the phone rings, and you know how we do. I pick up the phone. Special Agent Frank Burton, may I help you? And it is the Assistant Director of the FBI at that time, John Miller. And he called to congratulate me for the investigation and the work and the expeditious time that it took in solving the case. Also, what was kind of unique, Nina Tamani did a PSA for the FBI, and it was on the website actually until maybe a few years ago in regards of a hate crime. And Nina Tamani and I went all over the country presenting our case to different divisions.
Yeah, I saw that PSA. I actually, for some reason, you're right, it doesn't come up on the actual website or on YouTube anymore, but I was able to download it.
On October 2nd, 2006, I became a victim of a hate crime. I never knew what a hate crime was. If you're not a victim of a hate crime, you tend to distance yourself from it and say, oh, it can never happen to me, and it just happens to someone else, not me. And unfortunately for the victim of a hate crime, unless you get shot to death or stabbed, people tend to trivialize your feelings. On October 2nd, 2006, one of my employees sent me a very, very hurtful letter at my office where she tended to say that, remember 9/11, you and your kids will tie to the fence and you will die. So my first reaction was to call the police department of the city which I reside in. And they pretty much told me that if I wasn't shot or dead, there's not much they can do for me. I had to follow the system because either I take matters in my own hand and I do my own detective work, which ultimately could lead me to go to jail, or I reach out to what I then perceived was the enemy, which was the Federal Bureau of Investigation. So I had no choice but to turn to them. And the reason I say that they're the enemy, it's not because they've harmed me or any of my family personally. It's just because where I come from, in our ethnic background, we see their equivalent in our countries, and where you go in, you don't come out. And I said to them, please help me. Please help me and my kids because we're your citizens too. And I defied my family's morals, and my husband didn't want me to go public for fear of my losing my life, literally. So I defied all that, and I had to do what I had to do for my kids. And I went to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and I use the system, and I can hold my head up high to my kids today. And as you can see, I'm not handcuffed. On October 2nd, 2006, I was a hate crime victim. I survived my hate crime. The pain will still be with me for a long, long time. But my healing process is that of reaching out to others and letting them know they're not alone. For more information on getting involved in either bettering your starting at the level of combating hatred on the school level, the youth level, or getting involved in combating hatred in community outreach programs, please call your local FBI office.
Thank you, Jerry.
Yeah, well, congratulations on a case well done. You worked on many operations and assignments that were well done. And I'd like to talk about one of your assignments because I've mentioned it casually in different episodes, but I've never really talked in detail about SOG, the Special Operations Group in Philadelphia You were one of the team leaders.
Yes, I was, Jerry. And SOG was special to me. I spent probably half of my career out in SOG, and we worked some significant cases out there.
All right. So, for those who are listening who have no idea what we're talking about, tell us a little bit more about the SOG program and what you guys did every day.
Yeah, each of the major divisions, the big cities, have what's called a special operations group. It's a surveillance team. You have SOG, which are armed agents, and you have SSG, which are support personnel who come on with the FBI, and they do not carry weapons. And so that's the difference between SOG and SSG. So some of the cases incredible cases that I was a part of, as soon as I got into the Bureau, I came in 1991. I got thrusted into SOG probably in 1992 or 93. Naturally, during that time, we worked the Philadelphia LCN, and it was hot and heavy. I mean, Jerry, you remember, they were killing people just about every month. And so I got a chance to sit in and do a lot of different work with them. As a result, in 1995, I had an opportunity, one of 5 agents, Afro-American agents, to go down to Atlanta in 1995 to help clean up the area which the Olympics would be, Zone 3 in Atlanta. And basically a lot of drugs and a lot of prostitution. And so 5 of the agents and I from Miami, New York, I think from Baton Rouge, and one from Jackson, we went down there and we did such a good job that the next year, 1996, we got a carrot, which means that we got an opportunity to work the Olympics as surveillance agents in 1996. And the crazy thing was, when we first went down to the Olympics, we reported early in August, and we had a meeting with the Atlanta Committee of the Olympic Games, and they told us, listen, you are not to fraternize with the athletes. You're not to go around talking to anybody. I don't want you guys. And they put a lot of restrictions on us. And for the first 2 weeks before the Olympics started, they had us running down leads down in outside of Alabama, just about different things that might possibly happen. And then on August 22nd, right around that time, the bomb went off in the Olympics. And our team, Philadelphia, I was part of the first team, the first group to sit out on then what we thought was a subject, but he was not, Richard Jewell. And so, Jerry, I know you talk a lot about you want the FBI represented well and what we do. When that movie Richard Jewell came out, it featured my group of agents that were in there. And they showed the agent sitting outside of his apartment in Atlanta. But some of the stuff that they put in there, it was theatrical. We didn't do some of the stuff that they said, but it was funny to see that our group was out there on Richard Jewell that day.
As a member of SOG, let's talk a little bit more detail about what you do. I mean, you play an important role in many of the violations and many of the cases that an office has where they need someone to come in and do a surveillance of subjects, witnesses, victims, to be able to have eyes on what's going on in cases. Tell us a little bit more about the day-to-day and how that works and how you get assignments.
Jerry, we support all the case agents in our division, but not just only our division. Each of the major 16 field offices have an SOG team. And so if there's a big case, we travel all the time. We're on the road all the time. And so what we do is we go out and we support the case agent by getting surveillance. We take copious notes about what individuals and subjects are doing, along with the Richard Jewell case. And I've already mentioned the Philadelphia LCN. I had the opportunity to work on a Robert Lipka espionage case. He was an NSA clerk that gave documents to the Soviet Union back in 1997. I had the opportunity with SOG to work the Oklahoma City bombing trial in Denver, Colorado. And that was just crazy out in Denver. That's actually where I received my call to ministry as well. We worked the Pent Bomb Major Case 82, Pentagon bombing in 2001. We worked the Amerithrax, that anthrax major case back in 2001. And then probably another golden time for us in SOG was I was part of the group that worked the Lackawanna 6 right after 9/11 up in Lackawanna, New York. And they were the group of 6 Yemen terrorists who were living in Lackawanna. And we went in and did a lot of work to be able to identify who they were and where they were. And as a result, an arrest came afterwards.
All right. Who is exactly on an SOG team? How do you operate? What do you do on a day-to-day basis?
There are a group of, maybe on our team, we probably had around 21 to 25 individuals. They're older gentlemen. I was a young guy back then, considered a young guy. You have to have a mix. You have to have females. You have to have males. You have to have all ethnicities because you have to be able to go in and out of places undetected. And we operate on a day-to-day basis. We will sit out on a subject, follow a subject, maybe 8, 10, 12 hours a day, whatever it takes. I remember working some assignments. We always carried a go bag. We were in the military with MREs. You had food and everything because I might leave from my house and go to Philadelphia and start working a case. And we might end up in Georgia. We might end up in Maine. It just depends on where it would take us. So it was a very specialized group, and you had to have a unique skill set to be successful at it.
You talked about having a diverse group. Could you explain a little bit more about why that is necessary?
So when I came into the FBI in 1991, and I remember applying for the Bureau, and everybody kept telling me, you're an athlete from Delaware State University and a Black male. What are you going to do in the FBI? You're an English major. The FBI is made up of all lawyers and accountants and mostly white males. And so what you had to understand when you started talking about SOG, you couldn't send a lawyer and accountant down in Camden on 10th Street to work because we actually had some SOG members go down in Camden and refuse to work there because, people would take shots at them. When you're working out on the street and those people think or believe that you're law enforcement, anything can happen. So you have to be very diverse. And so I believe that the FBI realized that you needed a more diverse group to be able to go in a bigger populous area. And so I think they addressed that well, and we did very well with that.
So when a case agent would put in a request for SOG to follow one of his subjects or one of her subjects, what exactly were the criteria that would allow that to happen? I'm sure it had a lot to do with what assignments you were already involved in and if you had the manpower to take on additional responsibilities. But what made a request from a case agent be accepted when they needed to have surveillance? I'm sure there are some situations, I had those in my cases, where just people on your squad helped you out. What kicked it up to the level where SOG would be asked to take over?
It depended on the magnitude of the case, meaning that if what you just said, sometimes you had some of your agents just help you out on your squad. But if it required a more lengthy, a more detailed with those notes to be able to capture video, to be able to have people who were skilled in doing this every day, we had specialized equipment. And I won't go into that. That's in my book as well. And I won't go into that on the interview. But we have specialized equipment. We trained every single day. We went to Quantico. We developed some of our own equipment, which was phenomenal. Like when I first started, there was some stuff that you couldn't use at the end. So to answer your question as well, Fugitive Task Force had a case and they asked us to come out and do this surveillance. And this was the prerequisite. And this is what they said. There is a young man who dated a girl in Florida and they didn't get along. They broke it off or whatever. He took the baby, brought the baby back to Philadelphia. And he told his girlfriend before she left, if you call law enforcement or law enforcement gets involved, I will kill the baby. So we get the call from the Fugitive Task Force to assist them with it in the case agent from Squad 10. And we go out there and we start to surveil this place where this young man is supposed to be. And we get a description of him. And it's the other thing. You got to be very detailed. You got to be very careful. So I'm sitting as the team leader on this house. And the description of this white male is that he has red hair, a beard, and a pair of earrings. Well, we sit out on this house maybe around 7 hours and two older people come out and they go to a supermarket and they go to a section where they have Enfamil. So baby food formula for, at that time I had young kids. So I knew about the age range, about what the babies would be eating. This baby had to happen to be in that age range.
So you are a member of SOG, actually followed them into the supermarket to see what they were doing, what they were purchasing.
Yeah, a lot of times you had to get out and go on foot just to get a closer foot ideal and a view. So I went out there, I saw what they purchased, I came back, I let my group know, my team know what they had purchased. And I said, well, that's a clue that maybe there is a baby in there about that age. But again, you got to be careful because the guy said if law enforcement's involved, that he would kill the baby. So we took the threat seriously. So we sit out there maybe another 4 hours. And then lo and behold, Jared, a guy with red hair, it's the wintertime, with red hair, comes out, red beard, and he walks down the street to a corner store. He goes into the corner store. I go down. I tell the group, I say, I'm going to get out. And as he comes out, I'm just going to walk past to identify whether or not it's our guy. And Jared, the guy comes out. He walks by me. And as he walks by me, I look at him. Yo, what's up? He says, what's up? And so I look at him. He looks just like the picture, but I don't see any earrings, not just any earrings, but I don't even see holes, right? So I tell my group, I said, hold on. Let's hold off. That may not be the person. Let's just sit a little while longer. And sure enough, Jared, this guy had a twin that looked just like him that came out. Maybe another 7 hours later, the guy comes out. He walks down the street. He goes to someplace. I do the same thing, make a pass. He has the earrings. We identify him. I go back, tell the group, and we call a takedown. We take the guy down on the street, go to the house, hit the house, and we find the baby in the basement in the back room, secluded. And probably the highest moment of my career in all the cases that I worked, the best moment was calling that mother to tell her that we had our baby and the baby was safe.
Excellent. I think one of the other things that we should mention is that in many situations where SOG is called up, you end up executing an arrest.
Yes.
As was the case in this situation, because you're conducting a surveillance and if the opportunity arises, you don't wait and call for, the case agent to come. It's necessary to go ahead and make that arrest on the spot.
Absolutely. And that just speaks to the intensity of the work that we do as special operations. Jared's dangerous out on the street. And you know as well as I do, in 1995, one of my partners, I used to work on the drug squad, Chuck Reed, he was doing an undercover deal. And I'd worked on his deal before. So I was kind of intimate with the case and knowing it before I went back out to SOG. And then we got a call to cover a meeting right down there at underneath the bridge at a hotel. It's a different name of a hotel now, so I won't even put out the names of the hotel. But I was probably 250 yards away from him when the deal went bad and shots were fired. And by the time we got to where he was, both Chuck Reed and the subject were dead. So I tell people all the time, especially young people who want to get into the FBI. Also, the Broad Street shooting with Squad 2, we were out there as well. So I tell people all the time, when you get into this business, the FBI, and you see the stuff on television, and it looks good that you have the badge and you have the letters and you have the creds and you walk around, I'm telling you, it's a dangerous job. At any moment, your life can be called on. And this is what I try to tell people. I give them the good, and I've had a great career, Jay. I've worked some great cases. I've done some great things. But I let people know, if you want to get involved with this job, it is dangerous. Every single day. I've gone undercover in a lot of capacities, and it's dangerous.
The technical definition for special operations group that I pulled up on the internet says that it is a specialized clandestine vehicular and foot surveillance group where they follow known or suspected subjects who could be engaged in anything from espionage, terrorism, violent crime, and white-collar crime.
Yep, that's what we worked all those. Everything you just said, we worked all of those.
I would imagine that if you are a group that is specialized, that you're subject matter experts in surveillance, that you have a lot of training. Now, I'm not going to ask you to give away any FBI trade secrets about cameras and different techniques that you may use, but I would imagine that driving skills are very important.
Yeah, I definitely would not give any trade secrets away because that's what makes us unique. But one of the things is that you're probably in your car, your vehicle, 90% of the time. So here's the thing. People don't understand that when you go out and you drive and you see it all the time when people go out and they maybe start skidding on ice. A lot of people panic because they don't know what to do, right? And basically, when you start skidding in a direction, if you start skidding to the right, most people hit the brakes and they start turning left. But basically, what you do is you turn right into the direction of the turn and you don't slam on the brakes. Well, as an FBI agent who works special operations, we train at a place called, well, when we first started, it was called EVOC. And that was up in New York, but now it's a place right in Quantico called TVOC. And basically what that does, Jared, it allows the agent to understand. Once you understand that when you're in that vehicle, and no matter what you do, if you start skidding, if you start getting on an uneven terrain, that vehicle will not turn over. It will not flip unless you get on some kind of uneven, if you got like a road pavement and maybe a shoulder and some kind of uneven terrain, then you have the ability to flip. But there we do a drill called the 6-inch drill. And you're driving at a high speed, maybe 80, 90 mile per hour, and you're 6 inches away from other vehicles. And it's so funny, Jer, because when I was doing this, when I was on SOG, we'd be up in New York, up on the Belt Parkway, and my wife's like, "You're so close to this car." I was like, "Babe, we ain't even 6 inches close, man. I got plenty of space." So you do the 6-inch drill, you do the serpentines, you do the skid pan, which I just talked about, which is an oil slick road, and it teaches you how to maneuver. So you have to have that. And it came in handy whenever we would chase bank robbers. We've done that, and you have to do different car stops. It worked well at 9/11. You better know what you're doing out there. And so from, what was that? From 2001 to 2005, you're talking about SOG. We went all over the country tracking down leads on terrorists. And part of that was the Lackawanna 6. We were out in Arizona. We were in Utah. We were in North Carolina. We were in Florida. We were all over the place tracking down those leads. So SOG is a very important part of the FBI family.
And when you talk about tracking down leads, in some situations, you were sent out to augment other SOG units and other field divisions that needed your assistance.
Absolutely. Whenever we would go on TDY, temporary duty, we would go out to other divisions. The Lackawanna 6th, we relieved Cleveland Division. And so you're always doing something. When we worked the Oklahoma City bombing trial, there are about 7 or 8 divisions that came in for those weeks that we had the trial, especially if it's an ongoing case. You know, you bring in different SOG teams from different divisions, and then it's based on reputation and the experience that you had. Philadelphia got called out a lot because we got the job done.
So why would you need a surveillance unit during a trial?
So during the Oklahoma City bombing trial in Denver, Colorado, Denver to me is like New York City. It's a big city. Any and everything is out there. Homeless people are out there. Drug addicts are out there. But the main downtown part is beautiful. The hotel where these families of the victims stayed was beautiful. However, on the backside, Jer, in the alley, there were drug addicts. There were prostitution. There were what we call miscreants. There were all kind of unscrupulous characters. And so what the Bureau wanted from us as a SOG unit was to make sure that the families of the victims were unscathed, that nobody bothered them. So you needed those different groups to be able to keep watch and keep an eye surrounding the hotel. Our team's assignment was to be able to make sure that nobody was bothered. And I actually, as a SOG team leader, I took the assignment in the alley because I understood. I'm from the city, so I understood what it was like. I sat out there 7 o'clock at night to 7 o'clock in the morning, just talking to some of the people. It was an incredible experience.
Well, as you mentioned, everything that we've talked about is covered in your book, From FBI Agent to an Apostle, Saga of a Spiritual Sniper. So if anyone wants to hear more about what you worked on during your FBI career, then they should go out and get a copy of that.
My career with the FBI, as you know, because you shared it with me, we were there together, was incredible. I mean, did it have challenges? Absolutely. But I heard Steve Heaney say in one of your podcasts that we had front row ticket to the best show on earth.
So we're at the point of the interview where I ask a standard question, and that is, when and why did you join the FBI?
Jerry, my story is so funny because growing up in the city, I did not want to be in law enforcement because I had interactions with law enforcement when I was younger and they were all bad and I never got in trouble. I wasn't a bad kid, but just being a bigger guy, being a minority, I always found myself at the end of the pavement with a shotgun to my head and, oh, well, we thought you matched the description of somebody who just robbed XYZ. So that's not what I wanted to do. So I went to college. I played football and baseball. I got a job at a bank. And there, Jer, I met this guy who was my supervisor. They put me on this security squad. And the security squad was in charge of the Nigerian fraud ring, credit card fraud. And so I was there for a while. And then this guy came and he just retired from the Secret Service. His name was Bill Redunda, Sr. He was a retired Secret Service agent. And he brought with him a retired Newcastle County police officer, Mike Rogers, and a retired Wilmington police officer, Bill Osowski. So now I'm working with three guys in law enforcement. You got a city boy and these three guys. And so I start working with these guys. And one day, Redunda, the supervisor, walks over to me, the retired Secret Service agent. He says, "Frank, have you ever considered going into the Secret Service?" And I just looked at him. I said, "Bill," I said, "Bruh, the only thing I know about the Secret Service is that you're the president and somebody starts shooting at you. And when that happens, I jump in front of you to take the bullet." I said, "Nah, Bill, I don't want to be in the Secret Service." And he just started laughing. He cracked up, Jerry. And he said, "Nah," he said, "we do more than protection detail." He said, "We do treasury." He said, "But Jerry, sometimes somebody can say something that's changed the whole trajectory of your life." And this is what he said to me. He said, "There's so many different governmental agencies that you can choose from." He said, "But this is what I want you to understand. In any of those agencies, you can work for 20 years. And by the time you turn 50, you can retire." And I said, "Bill, what did you just say?" I said, 50, 20, what did you say? Because growing up, my parents were blue collar workers. And all my life, all I ever heard was, when I turn 65, I'm going to retire. That was the goal. And so once he said that, Jerry, it spurred me. And he told me a little bit about the FBI. I left that job to go teach and coach at Glen Mills in Philadelphia. And while I was there, I remember what he said. I went down to go take the test. I still keep in touch with Redunda to this day, and I thank him for his influence.
So many people that I ask this question say another agent encouraged them to apply. I just want to make sure that the retired agents and active agents remember that and keep an eye out for excellent candidates.
I remember going into the Bureau in 1991. I went to an administrative squad, which they sent most people, but I didn't stay there long because I was from the Philadelphia area. And that squad was meant to get the new agent accustomed to the city. Shortly thereafter, I went straight to SOG, which I explained some of the things that I did there. Came back in and I worked drugs. Then I was a civil rights coordinator. I worked on human intelligence. And there I worked with a guy named Freddie Fife. We solved a 2-year cold case in about 2 months. Also had the ability, and this is later on in my career, to serve as assistant supervisory special agent of the Joint Terrorist Task Force, 21 different law enforcement entities. And I heard you talk about this in other podcasts. We got along well with a lot of different agencies, and we all played well together. Then I was a hostage negotiator, and then I got involved. I was an assistant media rep for a few years. And then finally I had an opportunity in 2012 to be able to land the coordinator. At the end of my career, I worked on the Al-Qaeda Arabian Peninsula squad. And then my final duty was incredible. It was the Employee Assistance Program coordinator. Worked there with Steve Serrano.
All right. So when did you retire?
I retired in 2013.
And what are you doing now?
I am a pastor of a church in Delaware along with my wife, and we've been pastoring for 21 years. I became an ordained pastor in 2003, and I also have a business called Burton Executive Protection. And what I do there is I go around because the church is important to me and these active shooters are happening. So I go around teaching churches all over the country how to protect yourself in an active shooter situation.
All right. Well, I will put a link to your business in the show notes for this episode for those who may be interested in learning more about that.
Okay.
And you're also involved in one of the colleges near you.
Yeah, Jared, I am part of the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, and I am the chaplain for all of Delaware State University sports, as well as the University of Delaware football team. And I also assist with Wilmington University.
We're at the end, and I really appreciate you coming on today. What I like to do is to make sure my guest has the last word. So what would you like to say?
I've been retired for 11 years now. And as a retired FBI agent, what I do is I don't care if it's elementary school. I don't care if it's middle school. I don't care if it's high school. I always go back and I talk to young people. I don't care if it's college. And I talk to young people about the Bureau, and I talk to the people about the opportunity, not just the FBI, but like Bill Redunda did, the intelligence agency that these young people have the opportunity to work at. If they have any questions at all, I make myself available. I'm very open and I'm very transparent. I let them know the beauty of the work that I've been involved with, but I also let them know at the end of the day, I let them know about the danger. That's my way of giving back. I'll say this to end. This is probably the most important, and this is where I take most pride. In 2002, we had an FBI agent that was assigned to the Philadelphia division. He was from West Point. He was sharp. He was smart. And he came to work with me on SOG. And I remember just sewing into him and just pouring into him about the job. But also, he was a man of faith, so I talked to him about faith as well. We stayed in contact. I retired in 2013, and he went on to do a lot of great things. I kept in touch with him. I got a call probably around 2007 that he was now the SAC up in New Haven, Connecticut, and I was very proud of him. But the biggest thing, Jer, was I got a call from this young man. He told me, he said, Frank, he said, I want to thank you for sewing into me, talking to me, and mentoring me. I just want to let you know, he said, I am now the Associate Deputy Director of the FBI, Brian Turner. He's the third highest FBI agent in the world and the highest Afro-American agent ever. So don't ever underestimate the ability of what we say to others to encourage them or mentor them, because we never know where they're going to end up.
And that's the end of the interview. In your podcast app's description of this episode, you'll find a link to the show notes at jerrywilliams.com, where you'll see a photo of Frank Burton, links to articles about this hate crime case, and view several case-related images, especially the threatening note. You'll also find links to other FBI retired case file review episodes about hate crime. I hope you enjoyed the interview and that you'll share it with your friends, family, and associates. You can show me just how much you liked it by buying me a coffee. There's a link in your podcast app's description of this episode, or you can visit jerrywilliams.com and tap on the little coffee cup icon in the bottom right-hand corner of my website. Don't forget to follow FBI Retired Case File Review on your favorite podcast app. Now, this podcast is all about true crime, but if you're also interested in crime fiction, once a month via my reader team email, I keep you up to date on the FBI and books, TV, and movies. When you join my reader team, you get access to my FBI reading resource, a colorful list of more than 70 books about the FBI written by FBI agents who have been guests on this podcast. There's nonfiction, crime fiction, true crime, and memoirs. You'll also get my FBI reality checklist, where I debunk 20 cliches about the FBI and receive news about what I'm up to and about my FBI nonfiction and crime fiction books. I want to thank you for listening to the very end. I hope you come back for another episode of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. Thank you.